friends, Happy New Year and welcome to 2025. I hope you've had a great start to the new year, which has included some really fun reading for you. I have had a really good year for reading so far. I think it's been almost 4 weeks since I last saw you and I've read about 7 books I think in that time. It has been good. I have just been reading through my summer holidays, which is what I wanted, so I am so grateful for that, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you next week what I have read over my summer. But today what we're going to talk about is my reading goals for 2025. I'm going to share with you my ins and outs. I'm going to share with you 5 classics that I'm going to read this year and how my reading goals are kind of tying into my own personal goals in my life as well. So I hope this is interesting for you. So please grab a drink, settle in. I'm a little rusty, it's been a few weeks, but let's have a little bookish catch up. First of all, let's chat about the quantity of books and get that out of the way. The goal of how many books I wanted to read for 2024 was 50 books, and I surpassed that and I ended up reading 63 books. I think in 2023 I read less than 45, so 50 books was a big goal for me. So 63 was a big reading year. I never want to be the person that reads 100 books a year. I don't know how that would be achievable for me. I'm not that kind of reader. I'm a slow reader. I like to marinate on a book and take my time in between reading books as well as when I read a book. But what was interesting though was even though I surpassed my goal of 50 books for the year, I think I surpassed that like in November or late October, I also set a pages goal, and the pages goal was just shy of 19,000 pages. And I didn't reach that until maybe my second last book of the year. So I was well behind. And I think that was because I was reading short-ish books. I was reading 300 to 400 page books the majority of the time. I only read one book that was over 500 pages. So that was a better goal for me, was the pages, because I wanted to make sure I read a certain amount of pages every day. So for 2025, I want to set a goal in both areas. I want to set a book goal and a pages goal. And the pages goal, as I've said, is probably more important to me because it's an indicator that I'm reading every day. And for me right now, it's a little bit like when you first start working out and you lift a little bit of weights. You know, you might start with 1 kilo and then you gradually go to 2 and then 3 kilos and so on. So I think the 19 or just shy of 19,000 pages every year was maybe averaging out to about 55 pages a day, which I thought was good. So for 2025, I've set a book goal of 60 books for the year, which is fine. That's just a little bit of an increase on what my last year's goal was. It's less than what I read this year. But the pages goal that I've set is I want to kind of look at about an average of 75 pages per day, which is around, I think it's just shy of 26,000 pages for the year. This is way too much math for my head. I am not a mathematician. So I'll have those 2 goals that I'm going to try and meet this year. But that said, even though I'm not a math nerd, I am a numbers nerd. I love looking at numbers. And so my books that I read were anywhere from, like, they were short books under 300 pages or up to just shy of 500 pages. So if we said that I read 400 page books, that would give me 24,000 pages. So that is still shy of what my page goal is that I've set. So I need to push myself to read some bigger books this year, which leads me into some of my other goals. But before we get there, I think I wanted to kind of look back on what my goals were that I set last year. And it's funny because I have now been on YouTube for a year. So one of my first 4 videos was my goals for the year. My goals were very broad. This year, they're much more defined. I've matured a lot as a reader, I think, and YouTube has helped me do that. So last year, I wanted to read with diversity, but I really wasn't very specific in what that meant. I just said kind of like translated books. And I did read some, but I didn't measure it. So it was difficult to track. However, I did read some new authors, which I have really grown to love. So some of the new authors that I read last year were Colm Toibin, Kazuo Ishiguro, Percival Everett, Robbie Arnott was a first last year. Mary Shelley, I read for the first time. I read Frankenstein, so that was a huge, huge achievement for me. Daniel Mason was a new author last year. I had so many new authors, so I really did stretch myself to go out of my comfort zone. I wanted to try more nonfiction, and I did that. I read more nonfiction than the year prior, and I read about a quarter of the books that I read in overall for 2024 were nonfiction, which I was happy with. I discovered last year that although I really want to, I may not be an Agatha Christie fan, but I am probably an Arthur Conan Doyle girl, and I'm okay with that. I didn't read as much poetry as I hoped to, but there's always tomorrow. I am looking forward to trying to do that again. I added Carol Lewis to my list of favourite authors, which is growing and seems to be heavily represented by authors from the British Isles. My most read author was A.A. Milne, which I am not mad about at all. That man is a genius, absolute genius. And I would not mind trying one of his mysteries or crime novels, to be honest. Last year, I gave myself permission to DNF, and I had no guilt about that. Last year, I realized I loved literary fiction. I read more literary fiction than historical fiction. And when I started YouTube, I said I was a historical fiction reader. I read more last year of literary fiction, but I also had an excellent hit rate last year. I think my average rating over the books that I read was above 4 stars. So that was pretty good. I was very selective, and that probably helped that I had that DNF permission, that if I wasn't into a book, that I was able to just put it aside. I did want to read more in bed in the evening, which I used to do a lot as a teenager and in my 20s, but to be honest, I just can't do it anymore. I get to the evening and I cannot do it. My eyes are too sore, too tired, and I just can't read in bed in the evening. I am much more prefer to read in the morning, and that's something I figured out about myself this year, so there we go. Okay, so let's get into my 2025 goals, which I've kind of categorized as ins and outs, things I want to bring in, things I want to leave behind. Okay, before I do this one, I feel I need to preface it with a little bit of backstory. So in 2024 was a tough year health-wise. A lot of you know that I lost my father in 2024. I had some health struggles as well personally. I haven't shared a lot about this because it's still ongoing. But essentially in late 2023, I started to experience some symptoms that led to a lot of testing, MRIs, CTs, emergency department stays, and I didn't get any solutions. And eventually, after experiencing about 6 months of this, going through to mid-2024, I finally got a diagnosis through a third opinion, and I'm undergoing some treatment. It's not there yet. It has not been solved, which is why I'm hesitant to share all of the information with you, but it has led me to wanting to be very proactive with my health. And I also had my father passing in 2024. So seeing that happen and then my own health struggles, it's given me a different perspective on what my mortality means, what good health means now and also in the future. So health is going to be a big focus for me in 2025. I don't know how much of that is going to flow onto here, but it will show in my reading. I know it will show in my reading. I've always had an interest in health and nutrition, and I studied nutrition for a while, but it's something that I think is going to be a big focus for me, and that's going to be a reason why nonfiction reading and learning is going to be something that is definitely in for me in 2025, while passive consumption of information is out. I want to be deliberate with my time and how I spend it. So with the nonfiction and learning, I want to learn more about my body and my mind and what I can do practically to set myself up for a long and happy life. I've got another grandchild expected sometime soon, which if there is anything that makes you want to be more mobile, more active and healthier, it is having a grandchild. So expect from some nonfiction friends, I probably expect this to be in the form of memoirs and probably some science-based books. I have already had a few on the go over the summer. But I think it also means keeping up with other publications, like short form publications, maybe on the internet, publications, journals, that kind of stuff. In terms of quantity, I see nonfiction being similar to how 2024 was. I have one nonfiction book on the go for every 3 fiction books. I see that still being the same, but I'm going to be more purposeful with what I want to read. Last year was very much like fun memoirs, like 84 Charing Cross Road, whereas this year might be a little bit more science-based. In terms of what is out, this is most definitely, so this passive consumption is something that has been on my mind for a while, where we just, I guess we used to call it vegging out, and this is a phrase I absolutely hate this phrase now, where people call it rotting. You know, we're just rotting the day away. I prefer vegging out. I want to be intentional with that, with what I am consuming. So like before Christmas, I started rewatching Lost, which I loved that TV show. But I realized I was just watching it and I don't know why I rewatched it. I think I was just looking for something comforting. But you know, you start watching it and then next thing you know, you're on your phone and you're really not watching it and 3 episodes have gone by and you forgot, did that happen? Did I watch that episode when that thing happened? I don't want that anymore. I want to be purposeful and deliberate with the information that I'm consuming. Having done that, should have been a sign to turn it off and read a book. It really should have. And I need to just have the tenacity to just do that. I really do. I'm done with that feeling of vegging. Because then over the holidays, I watched some really great shows that were interesting and engaging, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. And it was a different experience entirely. I watched Shogun, which was incredible. The Perfect Couple, which was a lot of fun. Squid Game. I hadn't watched Squid Game before. I watched the first and second season, which was insane. Black Doves, One Day. Nobody Wants This. All these were such great shows that I watched with intention. I didn't have distractions. I sat down, I watched them, I enjoyed them. That is not passive consumption to me. So I want more of that. And the same with the books. I want to just enjoy the book and not just float my way through it, if that makes sense. So I think I'm going to resurrect my commonplace book. I'm going to resurrect my journaling. I really want to try and find a way to, you know, write this stuff down as I go through it and to retain the information that way. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to in with the nonfiction and learning, out with the passive consumption. I want to be purposeful with my time. Time is so precious, so precious. The next in is classics. I have 5 classics that I want to read over 2025. I've chosen 5. If I read some more, I read some more, whatever. I am over being afraid of books. Big books, classic books, old books, whatever. I'm over being afraid of books. So I have 5 classic books that I'm going to read, and I'm going to share them with you now. The first one is, and this is not the order that I'm going to read them in, but the first one is I'm going to read Anna Karenina from Leo Tolstoy. This will be my first foray into Russian literature. This is a big book. It is an absolute heifer of a book, 800 pages. It may be the biggest book I will ever read or have read, but this is most definitely up there as a classic I want to read this year. The Hobbit by Tolkien. I have not read any Tolkien. I am familiar with the general plot line. I'm looking forward to reading this book. This is going to be at the top, I think, of the ones that I want to read for sure. The third book that I do want to read this year is The Odyssey by Homer, and I think I want to read the translation by Emily Wilson. I have heard excellent things about that translation, and she's also done another one for the Iliad. My research has led me to reading the Odyssey before reading the Iliad. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't yet bought it, but that's what I'm leaning towards. So that's my third classic, is the Odyssey by Homer. And then I'll also read East of Eden by Steinbeck. This I had on my summer reading list, spring reading list, and I definitely do want to read this one. I think the story is going to be really, really interesting, but this is a classic, an absolute classic. I did put an Australian book on my classics list, so this is the 5th book, and this is Cloud Street by Tim Winton. Now this was published in 1991, so this is old. This is considered a classic. I mean, it was in the same century that this was written and this was written. And I really wanted to get an Australian book in there. And Cloud Street is something that I think it might have a little bit of East of Eden vibes, because it is about 2 families over a number of decades. They're living in the same house, and it's set in Perth, where I am. It is a classic. It's probably one of Tim Winton's most well-known books. I'm not sure. I mean, it's 1991. It might have been like one of his first written books. Anyway, those are my 5 classics that I want to read this year. I do have other ones on my bookshelf that I would love to get to, but I'm not going to pressure myself into that. And these are some big goals for me. Last year I read Frankenstein for the first time, which was not as daunting as I thought it was going to be once I got into it, and I'm hoping that these will be similar. Okay, next up. I had a rough 2024. So 2025 is for books that are going to be uplifting. They're going to rejuvenate my spirit in a number of ways. It is not for the books that are gritty, tense, sad, dark. This is not the year for me to read heavy-duty crime or A Little Life. That's not this year. I need to give my nervous system a break. I need to read some books that are going to give me some hope and some humor and just find a little bit more, I don't know, a bit of respite in my reading, I think. This doesn't mean I'm going to be reading Bridgerton books all year, but I think I need to find room for some humor. I think I need to find room for stories about the human spirit, and it's just not the year for heavy-duty books. That said, I probably will end up reading a few books that have a little bit of tension here and there, but this is not the year for A Little Life, that's for sure. Next up is some free resources. In and out is reckless spending. Guys, I joined the library over Christmas. I can't believe it. I can't believe it took me so long. I joined the library and I promptly took out 6 books to read over a 4-week period. This year, I hope to lean on free resources more. It's just that over 2024, I found it quite heartbreaking that I would go buy a book and it would just be quite a miss for me, and I'd be left with this book that I had invested money in. So I think I'm going to lean on the library and free resources to try out new releases or new authors that I have a feeling that I am not 100% sure. You know, like when I knew I wanted to read James by Percival Everett, I had a feeling deep within my heart that that was a book I was going to love. And so I bought that book. However, there was another book I wanted to read over the summer called Australian Gospel by Lek Blaine, and I was looking forward to reading it, but I was not sure if I wanted to buy it. And so I got that one from the library, and I was glad I got it from the library. So I think this is going with your gut is a good way to do this, and that's how I want to go ahead with 2025. I will buy the books that I have a feeling I know I'm going to want to keep, like The Hobbit. I'm going to want to keep that probably on my bookshelf, whether I really thoroughly enjoy it or not. I'm going to want it on my bookshelf to maybe try again later or loan out to someone, have someone here read it. But my experience with the library books I just had was really good. I loaned out 6 books. I've read 3. I've got 1 on the go, and I DNF'd 2. And I was going to buy 2 of those. I was going to buy those 2. I nearly bought them a couple of times, and I'm so glad I didn't. So I'm looking forward to leaning on those free resources more, but it will allow me to free up my money to be able to invest in the books that I want. I was able to get this beautiful edition of The Hobbit as opposed to maybe a cheaper version of The Hobbit. It has such beautiful little illustrations through it. So that's kind of what my logic is if I can lean on some free resources to free up my funds to purchase other things, like with the money I didn't spend on books in December and partway through January, I was able to buy the Narnia collection of books, which I have wanted for so long. And so that was the upside of that. I'll also keep using Spotify, I think, for the audiobooks. I generally don't listen to audio much. I do like it for some non-fiction books. Like at the moment, I'm listening to a Lucy Worsley book, which is about Queen Victoria. It's not my favorite so far because Lucy Worsley isn't narrating it, which I found as a bit of disappointment. But I do like listening to non-fiction here and there, and I do like having an audiobook on the go for when I drive. I'm just leaning into that free audio time that I have with Spotify. So my last in and out, this is the 5th one, is I want to incorporate my being well-read categories, and I want to try and leave following the crowd to the wayside this year. So over the break, I started to really think about what it meant becoming well-read. And I've mentioned this in a few different videos, that it's something that's been on my mind for a while. I think it was Tristan and the Classics who did a video about what it means to be well-read and how to become well-read. It was a really good jumping off point, and it led me to think about the type of topics that I want to become well-read in. And I definitely don't want to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So it's topics that I already like, topics I already know. So the topics that I have looked at and chosen, I want to become more knowledgeable in, and this year is just the start of it, is gardening and nature, art, psychology, history, which is primarily British and Australian history, and then also literature and science. So within these categories, I'm going to try and make sure that my reading is including books that expand my knowledge in those areas. For example, so gardening is a hobby that I do, but I want to become more knowledgeable about it so people can come to me for advice, which they do now. I want to become more knowledgeable about it for my own information. And there are so many books that I have currently sitting on my bookshelf that fit into this. The more I started to realize that the areas that I want to become well-read in are areas I already have an interest in. So in the gardening and nature, which I think is almost the same kind of category. So a couple of books that I have on my bookshelf now that fit into this area is The Seed Detective, Walden, Onward and Upward in the Garden, The Curious Gardener by Anna Pavord. And then adding in nature to that as well, there is The Salt Path and Landlines by Raina Wynn, Upstream by Mary Oliver, The Year of Sitting Dangerously by Simon Barnes, A Clear Flowing Yarra, Braiding Sweetgrass. Some of these books, while they have an element of nature and gardening in it, they also cross over into science or psychology. So it's kind of, the more I started to look at it, I saw how these interests started to kind of blend into each other. So I'm really not reinventing anything. I'm just being more making sure that I'm focused and more deliberate with what I'm reading. But it's not all nonfiction. There's also fiction as well. There is The Secret Garden, The Call of the Wild or White Fang, The Clan of the Cave Bear, The Great Alone, Circe, A Month in the Country. There are so many books that I could read that will enhance my knowledge in the area of nature, gardening, psychology, science, all that sort of stuff. So that's what I want to make sure I'm focusing on. But I think it's a much bigger topic. But I think that's why sometimes when I have read a book and it hasn't clicked with me, it's because it's been outside of my interests. So I started to see how this all kind of fit into place, I think. It's a much bigger topic, but I hope I've given you a little bit of an understanding of how it kind of fits in for me. And if you want to hear more about it, let me know. I'm happy to keep talking about these kind of books. It really does fascinate me. Like when I think about history, for example, pre and post-colonial Australia, like there's a book called How Aborigines Made Australia, but then there's also a book about Macquarie, who is one of our founding fathers, I guess. And there's another book that's just coming out, I think it's called Wirrawara, and it's Indigenous Australians' perspective of the First Fleet. And there's just so many amazing books out there that I really want to read and understand these things. So anyway, I digress, but these are the things that is getting me excited for the year of reading. And as for the outs, well, I tend not to follow the crowd too much. As you can see, I stocked up all of that TV show watching until the end of the year. If everyone's watching it, I don't tend to watch it. And it's similar with the reading. I waited to read Jane's for a number of months after everyone else did. I just do that. If you tell me to read it right then and there, I will not read it. That's just how I kind of flow. Unless Madeline Miller releases her book this year, I will get that. I will pre-order that and I will read it the minute I get it. That will be the exception. But I want to be discerning. I'm not on TikTok and Instagram that much, so I really don't follow the trends too much. And a lot of the really high-end trend stuff is fantasy, romantasy stuff, which is not my jam anyway. So those are my ins and outs for the year. That's kind of where I'm at. That's what I'm thinking. And as you can tell, I've been thinking a lot. But as for this channel, I think I'm just going to stick to 1 week a video. I do think that I'm going to try and do like some smaller, shorter videos. Some of the smaller 10 to 15 minute videos you guys seem to love, so maybe a few more recommendation videos like that will be a bit more regular, as well as these real chatty bookish chat ones. Yeah, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and you guys seem to enjoy it, so I hope that is okay. But if there is anything you would love to see, if there's any ideas for like topics or videos, please let me know below. You guys have come up with some really good ones in the past, and I will steal your ideas, absolutely. Please do let me know. But anyway, thank you for joining me. Next week, I'm going to share with you all the books that I have read over my summer break. So please join me then, because I've got some interesting books that I have read over the summer, some good books. And I think I've got a 5-star in there. I think I do. So please join me then. I hope you have a wonderful week of reading, a wonderful weekend of reading ahead. And please let me know below if there is a single goal that you have, maybe not like in terms of quantity. Is there a goal you have for this year coming up that you would like to share? I would love to hear it. So thank you so much for joining me. I am so thankful you're here, and I will see you soon. Bye.